Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode.
Okay, here we go. Today we're going to talk about identity as it relates to purpose, working on ourselves, who we are, what matters most. I think we kind of get wrapped up into kind of a performance-based identity from an early age, whether it's, yay, you got an A on your test, or yay, you scored 10 points in the game.
I'm already seeing how those conversations naturally come up with kids. It's like, did you win? How many goals did you score? Did you score a goal? At this age, at 4, his only goal is to score a goal.
Right.
So it's easy to want to ask those questions because that's the only thing that's on his mind. But I also recognize that the more that we reinforce that one thing he's focused on is what's the most important, then when he's 10 and it's a bigger picture, we've only focused on that one thing.
Yeah, and we learn at very early ages that performance outcomes matter, results matter, and then at a certain point, I think, when we start playing like organized team sports or, something in a more formal setting, often, they're pretty much having fun until it's like they become aware of like what other people are thinking. And that's going to be, I think, different for every one of us in terms of when that happens. But at some point, we're comparing.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when it starts to become an issue that has to really be dealt with. And I know for our purposes, we named this business Unbound Performance. But it's for either one of us, it's not just about like, how can we be a better basketball player?
Yeah.
How can we be a better piano player? It's much more about the complete person.
General performance at life, I think, just
right.
We talk about pursuing
Exactly.
excellence on a regular basis. Like, how do you perform at that task of being excellent in everything you do? I think we always hear performance in like performance training, or you hear high performance, or you hear all these terms as it relates to sports, and I think it gets mixed up with like those words like elite and elite's the one that always comes to mind. But we also recognize that we perform in all areas of our life. You perform as a parent, you perform as a friend, and not perform in a fake acting character way.
Right.
But every time you do something, you are performing a task, or you're performing, and I think people get lose clarity on what that means, because we think about performance in things like acting or in sports or in test taking, that there's a measurement of that performance. But the reality is every single thing we do is a performance on some level. And I think having that, we talked about purpose last week, but having that identity helps you understand what those different facets are of your performance.
A huge part of maybe all of it, in terms of establishing your identity, has to do with your purpose and your values and
it's all connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what you decide is meaningful about how you want to live and the kind of person you want to be and eventually become, even further down the line, then I think that helps us take a hard look at the activities we're involved in that do get scrutinized by others, and where we're very aware of what
People's
other people, what they're thinking about us. And I think that's where, like if you talk to athletes, I know very common, you had the same experience, one of the key things they'll say is they don't want to let their teammates down or their coaches down. And that sounds admirable. However, you're not doing anything but if that's what you're preoccupied with. And so
Well, and also the measurement of like what is letting them down, like what is the standard that
Right.
they're expecting
That's
from
really
you.
good.
Because
Yeah.
if you are being a good teammate and you're being, a good leader and a good, whatever the words are not coming to my mind right now, but just if you're doing those type of more like character type things, then you're not letting them down. But if you view that what you bring to the table is that physical performance or those statistics, then yeah, you're going to feel way more frequently like you let them down. But there's also that other side of the sort of what character you bring to the table, that if you can bring that consistently, you'll never let them down.
Right. That's where, like, are we going to have a performance based identity where every mistake we view as a means to be letting down our teammates or our coaches or our parents or our coworkers? And that's a great perspective that you just mentioned, where your what matters most is the person you are and who you're becoming and what you bring to that besides a performance result.
Outcome.
And
Well, I think too, this is probably a tangent that we'll get to at some point, but I feel like a lot of times we get wrapped up in that performance expectation because we know that other people don't have the view. Like, so like, let's say you feel like that you're gonna work your hardest and be as diligent as possible and do your very best and strive for excellence. And you know that ultimately the performance outcome is not the measurement of you as a person. But if the people around you, like your coach or your boss that you're submitting a proposal to or whatever, if their measurement is performance, it can be really hard to stay mentally in check and keep that confidence that, look, I know that I did my very best, I worked my hardest. Just because they are measuring it on something differently than I am doesn't need to impact the way that you view yourself. And that's hard. That's really challenging, especially for young people. But that's one of those things that I think comes with just age and wisdom and practice. But the sooner we can start practicing it, the more easy and comfortable that process gets to really separate who am I, what are my goals, what's important to me that I give to others, what are others going to naturally expect from me, and recognizing the differences so that you don't fall into that trap of
well,
constant letdown.
you may be in an environment where you have superiors, whether
Yeah.
it's a boss or a coach or whatever. That is how they view you.
Yeah.
And one, that's not sustainable.
No.
I think that in the short term can create some high performances, but it also comes with a lot of anxiety and stress. And I think when we're in those kind of situations where other people's opinions, like they do matter,
Yeah.
that's where you have to be able to return to yourself
100%.
and have a strong sense of who you are while you're doing this, who you want to become, what's important to you, to at least not let them, I don't know, destroy you.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
in a sense.
it will. It just eats away at you.
And that's where you can't enter into those environments without a fully formed, or at least a well-formed sense of who you are, what's really important. And that's where, we talk about the process and things like that, that if you are consumed with learning, growing, becoming, then you're able to deal with those kinds of, whatever you want to call them, slings and arrows from other people. Because, I mean, they're coming.
Always.
There's nothing you can do to evade them. I mean, it matters in terms of who you surround yourself with and things like that, but some of those choices are out of your control.
Well, I think that's the very first step, is just recognizing that, like, you can make your own changes, but there are still going to be way more variables that are out of your control. Like, I talked about this way a long time ago in an earlier episode, but when I first started my first like big girl job, every day I went home strung out, like wondering if my boss thought I did this or if he was satisfied with that. And finally, like 9 months in, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I finally just decided, look, if he can think whatever he wants. If there's a problem, he needs to say it. Otherwise, I'm going to move on, because I know that I'm doing my best. I know that I'm working hard. And that was just that first step of me recognizing there are going to be things that I'm going to wonder about, or that are going to, even if it's something that actually comes to fruition, he actually says something that's out of my control of whether or not that comes up. And so just kind of having that, there's you, and then there's all of these other things around you, and just at a minimum recognizing how much is out of your control.
Yeah, and I think,
but also how much is in your own control, your internal.
Right, and that's where, Gervais talks about, like, the first rule of mastery really being like working from the inside out. And often when we look at performance, we think it's improving our skill set, whatever it is, and improving our results in a short term. But if there's always the next thing that we have to measure ourselves against somehow, the anxiety and stress, yes, and so the anxiety and stress that comes with that is debilitating in terms of performance. So you're not going to get your best performance. At some point, the wheels fall off, and I think that's why the foundation of this kind of living has to be determining who you want to become on this journey. What is your purpose and cause? I know Simon Sinek, he always talks about like your noble cause, and that's pretty much always involves other people.
Yep.
But I think we're so often unaware that is happening, and we get stuck in this loop from very early age where we realize our performance results matter. Often those are the things that are praised.
Yep.
And as we get into, you see it constantly. Kids will start playing a sport, maybe like in a travel situation when they're 11, 12. It's all fun and games. Yep. And it's just the nature of it. It's not a wrong or right thing, but all of a sudden they were very aware of where they are in this hierarchy. And you're on a 1 team or a 2 team or a 3 team, and you're being judged by your performance. Yep. And if you're going to let that dictate who you are and how you feel about yourself, you're going to be in trouble. You're always then a victim of the whims of others. Yeah. And when you're 13, that's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I was talking to a mom at school last week because club tryouts are going on, or just wrapping up, I guess. Mm-hmm. And her daughter played for one club, the one that you and I are most affiliated with, last year, and hadn't gotten an offer from any level team yet. Another club that she was like, in her mind was like the next step down, no offer. And the mom is like stressing because the daughter's upset and feeling disappointed. The mom is like taking that on and really wanting her kid to be happy, of course. And she actually came to me at some school event last week, and she was like, she finally got an offer. And I didn't recognize the name of the club that she's playing for, although not that I would recognize any new clubs these days. But I told her, I said, I'm so happy she just gets to keep playing. And she said at one point, she was like, she really kind of realized that she just wants to play. And if there's somewhere she can be on a team and get to play and have fun and enjoy that sport, that's what she's happy with. And it's a club further out from their house, but it kind of went from that, like, needing to be back on the same club or the same level team. Okay, well, that didn't work out. Oh, well, the next club down isn't working out either. But when it's all said and done, you have somewhere to play for a sport that you love. And ultimately, hopefully that is the goal, and not to be able to say, well, I'm on this club's, A team. It's just, I love the sport and I get to play.
Yeah, and that's most people that are even involved in that decision-making process are pained by it. Yeah. Some may not be affected too much, but most of them, they are. Yeah. And I don't know that there's a way around how that all shakes out. That's just the nature of it. But not letting yourself be defined by what level team you happen to make when you're 13 or 14, that takes real intention.
For sure.
And
on the parents' part too.
Absolutely. Well, to me, the parents are
the number one driver at that age.
Yes.
For sure.
And so making sure that child has a healthy perspective on all of this, and knowing that they are so much more than what level team they make at whatever club they happen to be playing. It's really important. Plus, you never know how it's going to shake out.
No.
I still remember, this is several years ago, that this person's now out of college, but she was on a 16-3 team, and she wound up being a Division I scholarship player. And that's happened more than once.
Yeah.
But what she didn't do was let the fact that she was on a 3 team
Right.
determine her worth.
Yeah.
And that's
And
where
what her goal was in the end.
exactly. And I think the nature of all of these, I don't care what it is, whether you're the number 1 chair in the orchestra or where you are in class rank.
That was never very high.
Well, you were higher than I was. I guarantee you that. I didn't really care too much about where my
I didn't either.
class rank was or what my grades were, as long as I wasn't flunking.
I was
So,
a little above that, but
yeah, no, you were way above. I'm not advocating that approach.
good point.
But I think that's where having other people and their opinions carry so much weight with how you think and feel about yourself is pretty much disastrous.
Yeah.
And that's, I know, I'm going to sound really slick here. I'm going to quote Lao Tzu and Tao Te Ching. He talks about if you're concerned with the opinions of others, you are their prisoner.
Yeah.
And can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And that was written a long time ago, thousands of years
Right.
ago. So finding a way to extricate yourself from that predicament is pretty important.
Yeah.
One, from an athletic standpoint, when you start playing whatever sport it is, you do it because you enjoy it. It's
Right.
fun. And then at some point in this process, when we become aware of comparing ourselves
Right.
to others, and then all of a sudden it's not as fun.
No.
And when we're not enjoying what we're doing, guess what else we're not doing? We're not playing as well as we could play.
Well, and I think the real life example I'm seeing now in my 6-year-old is you go from being an innocent kid who wants to have a unicorn
Right.
backpack and doesn't care if you're wearing stripes with polka dots at the same time, and then suddenly you have this awareness of other people and that the older kids aren't carrying. This was a very specific example.
Right.
This
Yep.
week she was like, I don't want my unicorn backpack anymore, and she loved that thing last year. It glows in the dark, like it was, and to me, like she should wear that for 10 more years. Not really, but
Okay.
as her mom,
Good.
you know what I'm saying? That like I didn't expect that by first grade we'd be
Gotcha.
already doing that. And I mean, part of it's growing up and just the awareness of self and others. And
Right.
I want her to become more self-aware, but not more self-conscious. And that's something that I'm really teetering on right now is, supporting her in what she wants, but explaining that, if she doesn't need to do those things for other people. If she wants to stop the unicorn backpack, that's fine. But not that she thinks that she shouldn't because it's babyish or whatever reason. And I think the same goes for sports. I think there's also this, I think it's nearly impossible, at least for me anyway, to never let anyone's view or for good or for bad impact you, at least in an acute way. Like if someone's disappointed, you're going to feel some kind of way. If someone thinks you didn't play well, you're going to feel, I think you will have those more acute scenarios where you have a natural emotional reaction to the way someone perceives you or judged you or likes you or doesn't like you. If you can recognize that you will be impacted from time to time, but it doesn't define you for the long term, it doesn't need to be something that you wallow in forever, that you take home and that you go home and try to correct and shift and always be changing gears, because that's exhausting too. That's where I think that prisoner kind of mentality comes in, is if every time someone tells you something about yourself that you don't believe and you try to make a pivot to fix that, again, back to that first conversation we had, there are so many outside factors and there's so many people who can make a judgment on you or make a comment or have an opinion that you're going to be chasing your tail forever, and that's exhausting and doesn't serve you as an individual.
Yeah. Well, one, I think the scale of what we have to deal with now in terms of feedback of any kind is much greater.
Yeah.
And from the social media standpoint, where when I grew up, I had a few people that knew me and either liked me or didn't. Well, now it's like hundreds and hundreds of people and
complete strangers.
Yes.
I mean, that first half of that podcast you sent me talking about how pro athletes or college athletes can go in at halftime and check their phone and see what people are saying on Twitter about you, about your performance in that game right now. Like, how impactful if you are already feeling like you aren't playing well, and then it's halftime and you should be, flipping the script and having a positive mindset, and you go check your phone and a million strangers are saying you're playing like crap tonight. A, it's a million strangers, literally. Mm-hmm. And B, that's not going to be helpful. So ties into what we talked about last week in the social media stuff, though, is there are so many ways to hear people's opinions these days. It's very hard to escape. So you have to have that solid foundation of who you are to not let that completely destroy you.
And I know one tool that I thought was excellent, because it's not like you can't ignore feedback.
Right.
You have to choose the people that you listen to whose feedback matters.
Yeah.
I know Brene Brown, she talks about, like, if you're in the arena and you're bloody and sweaty just like me, okay, then I'm going to value your opinion.
Yeah.
But if you're just sitting up there in the cheap seats with nothing, no skin in the game,
right,
well then, sorry, I don't care what you think. A great example that Gervais uses in his book was this football player who had to deal with, football coaches, very intense delivery of criticism, and he talked about how that yelling doesn't help me perform.
Yeah.
So what he did, he developed what he called a screen, and he would pause, and what filtered through the screen was what he could use to be better, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then if it didn't meet that standard, it stayed on the other side of the screen. And that's the ability to differentiate, to take a pause is important. And I know Gervais also talks in that book about the importance of mindfulness and helping you become aware of your own thoughts and feelings and how what other people say affects those thoughts and feelings, and being able to manage all of that. And so in this case where he used a screen,
he's going to take an inventory of what's coming in before he decides what he's going to put on the shelf. I think that's one of those ideas of, if you are very quick to react, and it's not, that's the easier way out, right? Is to just have that natural emotional reaction, that gut reaction to something. But if you can take a moment and separate what's helpful, what's not, what's important to me, what's not, what's just emotional on their end versus what is actually, what's the message, that can make all the difference in how you receive feedback.
And it's very easy to think that something is important right now when it may not be that important.
Right.
Like if it's something, say that a comment someone leaves on a social media post, at the end of your days, will you be
that one thing really?
It won't matter
at all.
And that's, I know a lot of the stoic thinking I refer to, that is a huge part of, they encourage you to regularly reflect on your death, not from a grim, macabre sense, but a reminder that you're not going to live forever.
Yeah.
And
these tiny little things.
Yeah. And so what you want to do is then you're reminded that you don't have an endless supply of days.
Yes.
So let's get the most out of this day that we have. Let's be grateful for this relationship. Let's be grateful for these opportunities to serve, and grateful for the beautiful things that come across, rather than get so sidetracked and preoccupied with what someone may say or think about you. And when it comes to a performance standard, when you're 75, it won't matter if you're on a 2-team or 3-team or which club you're in, and it won't matter if you got into this school or that school. It's what you have done with all of these opportunities and who you've become on that journey. What will you regret at the end?
Yeah.
Well, it's always, I wish I had spent more time with my family. I wish I would have, cultivated more these relationships.
No
rather
one ever says, I wish I made more money, or I
wish nobody's 75 and thinking, I wish I was on one team when I was 15. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Or I wish I could have gone to Stanford instead of UNC.
Yeah.
No, I mean if
We're oddly
that's
in the same conference now. I can't take
I
that.
know that
I
is
hate it. I hate that
yeah the
passionately.
Atlantic Coast Conference that goes from coast to coast.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's that sort of idea of it being a very acute scenario where it's not lasting forever. It's not. It feels very big in the moment, but think about how many moments we have in our whole life.
right.
I mean, gazillions, for lack of a better non-number word, but like you have so many moments, and they all add up to something. And like you said, though, the opportunities that you have, even if you make the 3 team, that is still an opportunity for you to
Right.
contribute there or to better yourself. So that if making the 1 team is still your goal, that's not saying that that's a bad thing, that's still your goal. But how can you use this year and this opportunity to make progress towards that goal? It doesn't mean that, you know, people always say like getting to your goals is not linear. I mean, you're going to take
Mm-hmm.
rights and lefts and backwards and forward. Like, it's always going to be that. So if you can view it as just a small little pivot in the path in the very end, then you can use it as an opportunity and as a way to grow and better yourself rather than saying, you know what, I guess I'm just never going to get there, and then not work so hard or not put in all the effort you have on that 3 team. The setbacks don't mean that your goal doesn't matter or that it's impossible.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where, how do you want to spend your days and your moments? Like locked on things that you can't control. Yeah, and those always include things like other people's
Yeah.
opinions, and whether it's the coaches who picked you to be on their team or didn't. And instead, be grateful for the moments, and then I'm going to lock in on the things I can control in these moments: my attitude, what I say, what I do, how I respond to obstacles and adversity and decisions I may not agree with. And then we measure that against who are we, who do we want to become, what matters to us most. And I don't know anyone who does these kinds of exercises in terms of establishing their values and purpose and fill the pages up with things, like, well, it really matters to me in the course of my life what team I'm on or what club I play for, or that's just some of it you can't control. And if
even for someone who feels that way in the moment, if you actually ask them to sit down and go through it,
right,
and that's where all these techniques we've talked about can get you to separate those immediate gut reaction thoughts from what really matters in the big picture. And yeah, I mean, I don't think if anyone can really sit down and be honest with themselves and really do those exercises, take time to think about it, you will realize that what you thought was really important doesn't make it on that list.
yeah, and that's that doesn't mean you're not going to feel disappointed
Sure.
or things like that, but it does mean that it won't blow you apart, totally rock your world. But the whole Marcus Aurelius thing with the obstacle is the way, that is the path forward. When you see something blocking you in terms of where you want to go, who you want to become, that you don't just stand there and look at it.
Right.
You like find a way to go through it, around it, over it, under it, whatever it is, and proceed.
Yep.
And then that is your identity. You become this person who views everything
As an opportunity.
right,
Yeah.
and instead of a judgment on our worth and value. And that's, you talk about what you bring to a team. If you bring that kind of spirit where you're optimistic and hopeful and forward thinking, well, that's something people like to be around, and it's inspiring.
And regardless of how many points you score, that's right. I think that's oftentimes one of those traits that people who don't ever get a second of playing time can bring. Like, what else can you bring to the table if it's not physical performance on the court or on the field? That if you can be that person that rallies when we're down, or that brings the team together, or reminds us of what our goals were when we have gotten so distracted and have forgotten, that can be something that you bring to the table that is just as important as the person who scores the most points.
Well, I remember very vividly, this is a long time ago, we had a young man in our school named Joey O'Connell, and he badly wanted to make the varsity basketball team. And he was undersized. He had cystic fibrosis. So he was not a big kid. He was a good athlete and a good basketball player, but smallish.
Yeah.
So I remember him writing this note to the head coach, Dean Monroe, talking about how he would be this certain kind of person on his team, no matter what. If he never played, he just wanted to be a part of it, but he would be the biggest cheerleader and the biggest supporter and the hardest worker,
Done.
no matter what. So, of course, we're looking at each other and reading this, trying not to cry.
Yeah, really.
And so he definitely makes the team, and he was such an inspiration.
Yeah.
And I'm not overstating it or sugaring this up at all. To the point, the News and Observer came and did a story on him his senior year. I can still see the picture that was in the newspaper of him standing on the sideline, waving this towel, yelling. And this is a person who did not lead the team in scoring or whatever, but he was hugely impactful and inspirational and unforgettable as a person. And I will never forget him.
I'm thinking as you're saying this, I feel like you see a lot of, let's call it someone with a disability, someone who had something that was going to limit them from an early age or early on in their life. A lot of times those are the people that are the most inspirational. And you think about, like, they had to determine very early on what they could bring to if they were going to be physically limited or mentally limited or socially, whatever their limitation was. And that is a lifelong, like, diagnosis, if you will. Then you have to decide, am I going to just let this be what I am, or am I going to do something about it or do something different and make that not be what defines me? And I think a lot of us who are blessed to not have that, you take it for granted. And then when something happens, you don't feel that. I guess what I'm saying is, if we could all recognize that, whether it's physically or mentally or emotionally, whether we're limited or not, we bring more to the world than just.
Well, he was such a fighter and a real tone setter. I mean, it definitely impacted. And that's, sooner or later, you're going to run up on something. It doesn't matter what it is. And if you're able to create that as part of your identity,
yes. That's what I think that's what I'm getting at. Is whether you begin your life with it and you've had it forever, or you inevitably know that something at some point is going to derail you or put you to a screeching halt, whatever that looks like. Either you're prepared for it or you're not. And if you know it's coming and you acknowledge it and you accept it, you build that better foundation so that whenever it comes, whatever it is, I'm ready to know that it's not defining me.
Well, and that's where I think from very early ages, parenting can be really important in that. Coaching can be really important in that. Like, no matter what, we never give up. Like, I was watching a rec baseball game a week or so ago, and the way these teams wound up getting picked, all the evaluations were rained out, so they were just kind of at random. And a couple of teams, the roster, it was, not filled with all-stars. But I can still remember watching these coaches at the end of a game when they were losing, and it was their last game of the season. And they were teaching all these right things. I mean, very intentional, really into it. And it was so cool to watch them teach these, 11, 12-year-old kids things that really matter about what kind of person you're going to be, how you're going to handle these kinds of struggles. And I said something to all the coaches afterwards about how that was one of the best things I saw the whole season. Was them doing that. And that is how you help people be prepared for the inevitable struggles and difficulties. And rather than pave the way, help kids develop this sense of who they are and have that be a part of it. Like, it really matters that, I didn't. Like, I still remember as a young kid being allowed to quit chores, and all I had to do was complain enough and I'd get out of it. And I thought they're being nice when in essence they're really raising a complaining quitter. And that's not the goal. So I will say athletics definitely help you deal with that more effectively. But that's where we have to, even as parents, we have to have a sense of what are we doing here?
Yeah.
What is our goal? What do we hope to accomplish? What do we think is valuable in terms of imparting these lessons to our children? What kind of examples do we want to set? And that just, I don't care what it is you're doing. That's going to help you perform well.
I think too, in that coaching scenario where the coaches were instilling those character traits in those kids, even I really think that what can really build yourself up is even if you don't know what those traits are in yourself, if you can encourage it in others, I think that's often how you find yourself. Like if you give yourself a purpose that I'm going to really just, we talk about service of others all the time on this podcast. If you can just dive into other people, it helps you discover yourself, discover where you have strengths, where you have weaknesses, where some holes that you can plug. And it really just serves that example of when you give to others, you build yourself and you discover yourself. And I don't think there's any better way to just learn your identity by helping others find theirs.
Yeah, I was talking to this business consultant yesterday named Clark Brown, and he was talking about how he writes in order to learn. It helps him like remember, it helps him kind of cement these ideas and thoughts so that, and that's goes back to like the purpose of journaling. That's one reason to do it. But then he says he's a better teacher as a result. And I thought that was really cool to hear him say. I mean, he's a grown man, he's no kid anymore, but he's still intent on continuing to learn so that he can better serve. And because otherwise, what's the point of learning? Just so you can know it and win trivia contest or something. But that's part of his identity.
Yeah.
He identifies as I'm a teacher, I'm a learner, I'm a servant, and that guides his actions moving forward. I think that's where having this sense of what matters, how we can impact this world for good, far beyond like the things that we can kind of get distracted by in the moment, where they may not align with our established values and what we think is a grand cause. That's why it's important to reflect on those things and be aware of them and establish them and keep doing that.
And awareness of them and establishing them comes in the practice of trying things.
Yep.
I think further to that idea of just pouring into others to help you learn about yourself, even if you don't know how to go teach people about, moral characteristics or whatever it is, like that's further down the line. But if you just say, I'm going to help someone today, I'm going to help someone if they look like they need help carrying the groceries, or if they drop something, I'm going to tell them they dropped their thing, or whatever, like just those little intentional connections and acts for other people build that habit of doing for other people, and then you have this habit and you're like, okay, I realize I'm doing this often. And then you realize, okay, well, I'm someone who's very aware of this type of thing, or I'm someone who notices these things in people and I can encourage, and you also, the more you practice those things, you see how people react to them. And like, I think I said this at one point very early on, but something 2 years ago or so I started doing was, if I think something positive about somebody, I go say it to them. And that has really just done something for me in a way that I see it brings them joy, because it's always a surprise. Like, oh, like stranger. Like I caught a girl off guard in the grocery store last week. I was like, I love your hair. And she's turning the corner. And I think I scared her. And then I'm a stranger. And then I'm complimenting her. And it was like all these things at once. And she kind of walked like, she ended up with a smile on her face. But I also realized that these little things that you do, I'm now learning that if I do those things, I can spark a little joy in somebody. I don't know if they're having a terrible day and I'm just the one person that said something, but to me, that's worth continuing the effort of trying it, to see that every time I do it, someone smiles. Like, that's not a bad thing, right? I think I've learned that you keep your mouth shut, you don't help people. If you say things, most people are going to take it positively. And I really feel like that's one of those. I was at the grocery store a few weeks ago at the self-checkout, and it's Aldi's, you gotta like bag all your own stuff, which has become a real game for me now. I love it. But I check out all my things and I reach in my purse and I don't have my wallet, and I'm like, shh. And so I asked the girl, I'm like, can I manually enter my card number? Because It's in here. She's like, sorry, you can't. Like, we don't have a way to do that. And I'm like, oh, 2 people. One woman said, how much is it? She was just going to flat out pay for my groceries for me. A complete stranger. And I was like, it was like $65. She's like, oh, if it was 20 or something, I would have just paid for it for you. Complete stranger. And then another woman was like, do you have Venmo? She's like, I'll pay for it. And I'm always weird with Venmo. Like, I don't want someone to, like, especially a stranger. I don't know. I'm sure there are weird ways that Venmo can screw people over. But I left that store like, oh my God. Like, 2 complete strangers. Like, they could have just sat there and bagged their groceries and paid for their own stuff. But 2 people made an effort to help me. And I left there on, like, such a weird, like, I was tearing up on the way out because I was like, 2 complete strangers. Further to, in a grocery store where a lot of people who don't have as much to give are shopping because it's less expensive. We're, like, so quick to be helpful. And I just think that I then fed off that. That was something that I'm, like, riding on this high because people were helpful to me. And then I want to go give to other people because I mean, again, call it karma, call it whatever you want to. I don't even think it has a title other than the more people do for others, the more it's going to keep coming around. Like, the more you infiltrate the world with goodness, the more goodness there's going to be in the world. And I think, especially when you receive it, don't stop that momentum with you. Like, be the one that's going to keep passing it on.
It's like a chain letter.
It's a chain. Yeah. I mean, it kind of is. A little pen pal. Yeah, it's going to come back at some point. But those are just those small examples of.
It's funny. My mom had
spark you.
Very same thing happened to her. She lives out in the mountains. So the grocery store she goes to finally opened, and she didn't realize they were only taking cash. They were only able to take cash. So she had her groceries there.
Yeah, they're all scanned, bagged, ready to go. Yeah.
And so she was just going to have to leave it there. And 2 different people gave her $20 bills to pay for her bill. Yeah. But that's not an accident.
No.
Like, those are people who have decided that that's who they're going to be and how they're going to live. And rather than be inward looking in terms of just constantly thinking about ourselves, one of the keys to all of this is to think less often about ourselves and think much more about how we can help others. And that doesn't mean that we're not aware of what we think and we're not working on ourselves and reflecting on how we can do that. That's how this all happens. But if we're just worried about our own happiness or whatever, then that's a very short-sighted way to go about all this. But that's, in the grand scheme of things, establishing our sense of who we are, who we're becoming, who we want to be, is crucial. I mean, it's just as important as it gets in terms of then being able to kind of max out our days.
I mean, you can either be a floating feather or a wet noodle in this world, or you can be something with purpose. And if we talked a few weeks ago about just like even the very small act of, like, in a very busy day, if you've got back-to-back things all day, even the small act of recognizing, like, this one task is done, I'm beginning this one, can, rather than at the end of the day, it was just this huge blur of things. I mean, you forgot what you even had for breakfast. But if you just stop, you take 2 seconds in between all the things that feel back to back to back, that gives you more meaning and more purpose in your day. And so I think the more we can do that in our entire day, and then in our week, and then our month, and our years, that's what builds that real effort and purpose in your life in the grander picture. And so it starts very small, but it sure ends in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mindfulness thing comes into play a bit here, where you just get good at being able to take that pause and take a breath and soak in the moment a little bit and not let those moments just keep shooting by mindlessly, because then you can make a choice about what you're going to do, who you're going to be in this,
you feel more in control, moment. And then, it's all about building that foundation of yourself.
When that your identity is your choice, like in this sense, like it's impossible to make that choice if you're not aware of what you're thinking, what you're saying. So it's a big deal to be like in the moment, to learn how to be able to lock in on the things that you can control, the things that you can't or let go, and being able to know the difference between the two, recognize those differences, and then behave accordingly. That's how you wind up having a good life. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.